Let's talk about cueing, especially if you're a newer coach. It can be tough to know exactly what to talk about. Like, what can I point out? What should I be looking for? So this is an acronym that's going to be your cueing toolbox. These 6 things are something that can be identified regardless of the exercise, whether it's a cardio movement, a strength movement, an isolated, a compound movement, whatever it is. So these 6 things, it spells out majors. M stands for muscle. What muscles should I be activating? That's your primary question to ask yourself. A stands for angle. What angle should my joints be at? That could be the beginning of a move and the ending of a move. Both are important. Joint. Which joints are moving and which are static? This is an important distinction. So angle and joint have a very specific relationship, right? The joints have an angle. Or the only thing that can be at an angle is a joint. So again, those have a very specific relationship that we'll get into in a bit. O stands for oscillation. What should the back and forth look like? So imagine an oscillating fan, something that goes this way and then it goes back this way. Maybe it stops on this side for a second and then it goes back. And maybe it goes halfway and then it goes back and then it goes all the way back, right? Something like a half rep or a pulse in one of our movements. R stands for range. How high, low, wide, shallow should I be moving? So of course that depends on the movement, which direction we're going in. And then speed, very self-explanatory. How fast should I go? This one, it's important to consider, well, maybe in one part you're going to be moving fast and then another part you're slow. So those are our 6 things that we're going to be able to identify in, again, literally all of our programmed movements. So let's get a little bit more specific. M, muscle. This is a very basic but specific example. A chest fly versus a chest press. Very similar movements, right? The difference is the angle of our wrists. In a chest press, our palms are facing towards the legs. In a chest fly, our palms are facing towards each other. In that fly, we're opening up. If you take your arms right now, see where you feel it. Do you feel it in the lower chest? Do you feel it in the upper chest? Do you feel it in the shoulders? Do you feel it in the biceps, in the triceps? And then do the opposite. So rotate your wrists towards the legs, like you're going to do a chest press. Same thing. Think about what muscles you're engaging. Now, when we're talking about muscles, I know you guys are all certified personal trainers. A lot of you have awesome anatomy knowledge. We don't need to be chatting to members about all the super scientific terms for our muscles, right? Maybe that's going to work for some of your members who are looking to get into that nitty-gritty stuff. But in general, best practices are just to say something like, hey, squeeze the center of your chest or the front of your shoulders, right? That can be enough to kind of give members that indication of, okay, those muscles in front of my shoulder, whatever that's called. I don't need to know right now. I just need to know that that's where I'm supposed to be squeezing. So again, a chest fly and a chest press are very similar. So what's the primary muscle that we're working for both of these? Shout it out. It's not a trick question.
Your pec.
Your pecs, chest. It's in the name of both. Difference between the fly and the press. Which movement is going to get really almost just the chest and less of our accessory muscles?
The chest fly.
The chest fly. So we're getting just across the body, right into the center of the chest. When we're doing a press, we talked about this last week, right? In our chest press. That's a very foundational movement. You're getting into the center of the chest. You're also getting into the shoulders. And you can see on the graphic here, right at that bottom one, that's the chest press. You can see at the top, when his arm is fully extended, that tricep is turning red. Right at the bottom, you can see the shoulder is turning red. Now, in the fly, conversely, so we're seeing, of course, in both movements, those chest muscles are bright red. You can see the top of the shoulder and into the bicep a little bit on that fly. Our biceps are a smaller muscle. So when we come out wide, we're getting a little bit into that bicep, but really primarily the pec is what's doing that work. Now, is you don't need to just be talking about those primary muscles, right? Those are what we're really emphasizing. That's where the growth is going to happen. But how about the quads? How about the hamstrings? Again, we talked last week about the fact that all of those lower body muscles should be engaged when we're doing these movements properly. What's a muscle cue that you can absolutely never go wrong with? What is a universal, super important muscular cue?
Engage your core.
Your core, 100%. Let's say somebody is doing a movement, like I said, perfectly, right? You don't see any adjustment that needs to be made. It's always helpful to still go over to those members and say, this looks great, Steve. I want you to engage that core because no matter what they're doing, that's going to help support it, right? So always a helpful cue. Fantastic. Next one. There's supposed to be a person behind these these dots. I don't know where she went, but you can kind of see it anyway. So angle and joint, again, these go together. But the difference is what's the starting angle and the ending angle of the movement, which joints are static and which are moving. Okay, so we can, again, we can tell that this kind of looks like a person. I hope you can tell. That top dot is the shoulders. Then we have the hips right in the middle, the wrists that are holding a barbell, then the knees and the feet. Which joint is moving the most?
Hips.
The hips, absolutely. Thank you, Heather. So right in the middle, that center dot, it's starting almost directly beneath the shoulders. In that second position, that's the first thing that moves. They go back. Then they go back even further. The shoulders start to come down. Notice the wrist as well. So this little dot in the middle, so that's really the knees and the wrist because they're basically in the same spot because we're keeping that barbell or the dumbbells or whatever it is close to the body. And then at the bottom, so this fourth position here and under, you can see this is a full deadlift. This is not a Romanian deadlift. This is the big difference. In a full deadlift, oh, there she is. She came back. So the hips go straight back, and then right at the bottom of your full deadlift, you're going to get a little bit more of a bend in the knee. Okay, so you can see this knee joint here in the first position. That's a pretty big angle, right? All the way through to that fourth position, we're approaching 90 degrees. Not quite a full 90, maybe depending on the barbell you have in your hand, depending on your range of motion, of course, that angle might change. But right at the bottom, you're in much more of a squat position. So that primary moving joint is going to be your hip, but we can also talk about the shoulders, the wrists, the feet. The knees are tracking the toes. We know that universally in all of our movement. So those are angles still to be paying attention to. Now, again, my person isn't there, but you can kind of tell. Versus a Romanian deadlift. Okay, so really this is the same. So we've got, this is the full deadlift, right? Those first two parts are very much the same. There he is. We go back until the wrists come just below the knees. Okay, and then we're not going any further. So that knee joint, so you can see here from hip to knee to ankle in both positions, it changes slightly because of course those hips are going back, but we're really not changing much about the knees. We're just keeping that micro bend the whole time. Shoulders in both movements are packed down away from the ears, right? That's universal for, we talked about that again last week in our front squat and our chest press. Those are still joints to be paying attention to, the angle of those joints. If we're rounding, that's not good, right? We're focused on the hip and knee joint, right? Because this is a lower body movement, but we're still thinking about, okay, where are the shoulders? They're back away from the ears. Okay, next one. There's a lot of nuance to this. O stands for oscillation, the back, and the fourth. So you can see up to the left, these are taken straight from the F45 TV app. Things that we see all the time. We saw this first one on Tuesday. Dumbbell incline bench press with a 2-second pause. That pause, we're of course saying it in the intro, but during class, 75% people are going to forget that that's a thing. And you can see if you look at the video really closely on the front of the room on the TVs, you can see that it's there. But most people are going to look up, see, oh, great, it's bench press, and go for it like that. Those are things that you need to be paying close attention to during class, reiterating, okay, guys, we're holding that dumbbell at the bottom for 1, 2, before we push back up. Same thing with that second one, power band standing upright row with a tempo, right? So it's 1 second up and then 4, 3, 2, 1 on the way down. That last one, plank pulses. It's a slight shift back and forth. Okay, so those are all examples of oscillation. Just like I said with the fan, same thing. Where are we going to? How far are we coming back? Are we pausing? Is it fluid? And then off to the right, so we've got all these push-up combinations, right? Oscillation is a really good way to make a movement either more challenging or make it a little bit easier with a push-up. So these are all examples of modifications or progressions. So we have our classic push-up in the bottom left corner here. Directly above that, we have the incline. Does an incline push-up, is that a modification or a progression?
It's a regression. Excuse me, regression.
It's a regression, yes, because you're taking off a lot of your body weight, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. Off to the right of that incline, we're on the knees. We all know that one is our classic regression, right? That's your first line of defense. Somebody can't do a push-up yet, we drop it to the knees, okay? So pauses and pulses and tempos always make a movement, what, easier or harder?
Harder.
Yes, because the muscles are going to fatigue a lot faster if you're moving really slowly in one direction. So let's say somebody can't do a regular push-up quite yet. Maybe their back is really arching. Maybe that's the problem. Their hips are coming too low. So we drop it to the knees. We focus on that core engagement. We tuck the hips under and we say, okay, try the push-up there. We just said that's a regression or a modification. Now, maybe they're somewhere in between where they still can't quite come up to their toes because their hips are still sagging, but they're doing the one on the knees really well. Maybe we can go down slowly, practice the descent with those tucked hips. Make sure you're engaging that core. So we can kind of level up that modification without going up onto the toes. Okay, range. Frog squats are one of my favorite things to coach because so many people do them incorrectly to start. And then once you start doing them right, oh my gosh, they burn like crazy. So like this first guy on the left, we're in that bottom position. The elbows are directly on the inside of the knees. That's where we're starting. And his hips are going all the way above his head. This is a stretch. If we're doing this in a warm-up, we're getting the hips moving, we're getting the blood flowing through the legs. What's happening at the top that makes that effective for a stretch, but maybe not for a strengthening movement?
The quads are getting locked out, so there's no more tension on his legs.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. At the top, that's kind of a resting position. We're losing a lot of that engagement. When we make it more shallow, so now we see the girl on the right, she's starting in the exact same position, but you see her hips are only coming up to her shoulder height. They're not going all the way up over the head. Her knees are staying the exact same distance apart, so her knees aren't going out and in. That's an angle cue. That's also really, really important in a frog squat, and I see that mistake so much. So keeping those knees at the same angle and shortening your range of motion, just like Mitch said, is going to keep the engagement in the glutes, in the quads. So we're working the whole dang time, right? If people need that rest, because again, as soon as you start doing it right, this gets real hard. So if you need to stretch it out, shake it out for just a second, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, that's kind of your resting position. And then try to jump back in and keep that range of motion nice and shallow. All right, last one. Something going on with my graphics, y'all. Speed. Hopefully this guy pops up in a second, but we're talking about a dumbbell snatch. This is a very dynamic movement that we see a ton. Okay. So hopefully you guys can picture this. Your feet are right underneath your knees. You're bringing the dumbbell between your feet in a hip hinge position. You're going to shrug the shoulder as you pull up. The dumbbell kind of comes just past your torso in that little zipping up a sleeping bag motion. And then we're going to land with it overhead. And then we're going to come back down and reset. In terms of speed, which part of this movement should be fast? Coming up or coming down?
Going up.
Thank you, Jennifer. Why?
You have the momentum to carry up, and then you want to put your strength behind coming down so that you're, first of all, you're stable, but then also you don't need the momentum anymore to carry it down.
Yes, it's a power movement from the lower body. So we're starting in that hinge. You're pushing through the legs. You squeeze the glutes, you squeeze the quads, you squeeze the core. That's where all your power is coming from. The arm is kind of like a vehicle up until right here. It's just following that momentum from the legs. And then we're going to quick flick. So we get under the weight, right about chest height. And then from there, we're really engaging the upper body. We're using that shoulder to get the dumbbell overhead. If we're going up slow, this part of the movement right here is not going to work so well. We need to get that momentum from the legs in order to get that quick flick and then activate the upper body to finish the movement. Just like you said, Jennifer, on the way down, we don't need that momentum anymore. Let's say we're doing these for a full 60 seconds. That's a long time, right? We need a second to reset at the bottom. We're going to extend that elbow and we're going to find that hip hinge again to bring it back down to the floor. And then we're going to switch sides. So we can take as much time as we need to recover in between reps on that way down. Then once we've got that dumbbell in hand, it's a quick straight up. So those speed cues are really important. Somebody can have the correct form. They can be keeping the dumbbell close to their body. They can have that shrug. They can have the core engagement. They can be drawing that beautiful straight line from the floor up to the ceiling. And if they're not going fast enough, they might not be engaging the right muscles at the right time. They're not moving their body in that dynamic way that we're looking for. What's another movement that's really important to go quickly through?
Clean.
100%. Very similar. What's the difference between a snatch and a clean?
2 hands instead of 1.
2 hands instead of 1.
Going to the shoulders and clavicle versus up in the air.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that same powerful movement from the legs. And if we're going slow, we're probably going to start rounding the back. We're going to lose some of the core engagement. A lot of that weight is going to be taken into the forearms, which we want to avoid.